Hello. We got lesson 3 with Luke in the way. Lesson 3, mental suggestion. Very, very interesting subject. Probably the most relevant of subjects because it's more physical than a lot of the rest. So it appears to be, it's not actually more relevant, but it would appear on the surface to be very relevant to a lot of what's going on. I had a very interesting night last night. I thought it was like midnight. I usually wake up at 4 in the morning, go to bed at between 8 and 9:30. I looked at my clock. I watched this movie. This movie came up. I don't have regular TV, and this movie came up on my YouTube. I have the Fire Stick called Donnie Darko. And I had seen it before, but I played the movie. I thought my clock was going to say midnight. It was 4 in the morning. I was like, whoa, where did time go? And it's interesting because the movie was kind of about time travel. And I lost kind of track of time, so I just stayed up all night. I think I slept an hour from like 11 to 12 or from 10 to 11. But I feel great. I do a lot of breathing exercises and meditation, so maybe that's why. Anyway, mental suggestion, lesson 3. Mental suggestion means of influencing or controlling the mental states of others by means of words, actions, or appearances. So this is more physical. We're not going to focus on meditative currents and telementation and all the fun stuff, but this is fun too. This is important. It's a good foundation. The phases of suggestion. There's an active suggestion and a passive suggestion. The active suggestion means the induction of mental states in others by positive command, affirmations, statements bearing directly upon the desired mental states. Wear your mask. Go to school. Whereas passive suggestion means the induction of mental states by subtle insinuation or introduction or insertion of ideas into others' minds. And these ideas, insinuation, induce the correct mental state. So, if we wear masks for the next 3 months, then 100, we'll save 100,000 lives. So they're not directly telling you to do anything, but what they're playing on is your feelings. You're caring for humanity, so they're playing on that and trying to bypass your logical mind. But we'll get into that later. The active form of suggestion is associated with the motive pole and is more masculine, and the passive suggestion is associated with the emotive pole, which is feminine. Remember, we have the motive pole and the emotive pole. The motive pole is related to the will force and the will power, and the emotive pole is related to the desire force, willpower and desire force. Suggestion has to do entirely with the feeling part of the mind. Judgment and reason are entirely removed, though judgment and reason can be you can actually bypass judgment and reason, so you can wear it down, so to speak, so it can be involved, but generally suggestion bypasses judgment and reason. They're removed. Here's a real good definition. The simplest definition of mental suggestion is a physical agent inducing a mental state. So like I said, meditative currents / energy telementation are not used in this form because it's all physical, related to physical agents, and that includes words, gestures, tones, and things like that. So it's physical agents that induce a mental state or make a certain mental state happen. Subtle insinuation. So subtle induction, as we know, is any mental state that comes from an outside influence. So when you induce a mental state, it means that the mental state is being caused by an outside influence. And any physical agent that causes a feeling can be called a suggestion. So remember, a physical agent, gestures, tones, words, any of those things that cause a feeling within somebody can be called a suggestion. So, the development of the will pole of mentation regulates the degree of a person's suggestibility. So if you strengthen that motive or will pole, then you're less likely to be suggestible because your will control your emotions and your feelings when when that's getting attacked by suggestion. I already have cracks in this phone. So the development of the will is important in defense against suggestibility. One with a weak will may, through suggestion, become weak of will. That's obvious. Ideas, something important to discuss. They seem like thoughts, but they're not. An idea is usually a result of feeling, and people do not know the why, they just feel that way. So they're not thoughts, and ideas just the result of a feeling you get. So if a lot of fear is instilled with about the coronavirus, you'll think it's okay to lock people down and wear a mask. So that's just one way. I'm using the COVID-19 because I think it's a mind f. I don't want to cuss, but it's a complete mind f. So that's an idea. And two, most are moved and swayed and induced, swayed by induced feelings rather than by reason. A feeling. What is a feeling? A mental state, emotion, passion, sympathy, sentiment, susceptibility, belonging to instinct, the instinct side of the mind, and not rational and reason. That's why suggestion tries to bypass that logical and reasoning mind, and it's quite effective. Most people do things based on feelings and emotion, not reason. And that's with both, with the election and stuff, with both sides of the parties, you see that people, not only is there a lot of groupthink, which we don't get into here on both sides, but most people don't think based on, most people think based on feeling and emotion, If you make people think that you're not doing something for the greater good, then you're kind of shamed into thinking you're doing something wrong. And that takes away your personal, they try to take away through that whole greater good thing, the personal responsibility that each of us have. Because remember, the group or the state is there to help the individual, not the individual there for the group or the state. You see what I'm saying? So, that's what the United States of America was founded on, was individual rights and popular sovereignty. Individual rights are, that's obvious. Popular sovereignty is the group comes together as a whole for the individual. Anyway, that's irrelevant. The 4 lines of action. This is an interesting aspect of the topic because there are 4 ways that suggestion is used. Mental suggestion produces its effects on the mind along one or more of 4 general paths: obedience, imitation, association, and repetition. So there are 4 lines of action related to mental suggestion. There are obedience, imitation, association, and repetition. And we'll get into each of those. First, starting with suggestion through obedience. These suggestions consist of induction of mental states by the agency of positive statement, assertion, assumption, and authoritative attitude, which impresses itself on the mind that the person sets up no opposition or resistance, and the person acquiesces. Most common is real or pretended authority. There's a lot of real or pretended authority. I'll give you a good example. With the COVID-19, most of the governors did quarantines, and they did executive orders requiring masks. Well, they don't have the authority to do that because the legislature makes the laws. All the executive branch can do is make an order that applies to the executive agencies. A law has to be passed for and then a governor has to sign a law passed by a legislature, whether within a state or whether within the United States, and then the governor signs it. So the pretend authority, and people fell for it hook, line, and sinker. So that's just an example of pretended authority. The governors have no authority to tell the people what to do. Man has become an obedient animal. The masses are astonishingly obedient to this form of suggestion. Look at everybody wearing masks. Nobody's even questioning it. All the negative health consequences of masks, the quarantines, and people are just being obedient to this. And as I said before, none of them are laws. And you notice no legislatures even pass, and I'm giving this as an example, the legislatures don't even pass laws because they would be struck down in a court, because it goes against medical It's medical tyranny. It goes against informed consent. You can't really force somebody to wear a mask to go in a store if it's not beneficial to them, if they don't consent to it. And they're not laws, because it would get struck down, because you're not letting people, it's not informed consent. They don't, you're forcing people to consent to something that may not be in their best health interest. Two, back to man as an obedient animal. Allow feeling and emotion to be induced by impudent statements and claims of cunning, shrewd, designing men, as well as by ignorant, self-deluded fanatics who influence and sway. Same apply. These self-constituted authorities utter statements with absolute authority, and the masses take them at their word, like I told you. Man, as a rule, has become an obedient animal. Look at all the people just wearing masks and doing what they're told and not standing up for any sort of right, and they're afraid to go against the masses or go against the norm. It's easier to acquiesce than to refuse to do so. I know people in my family who say, look, I just put on the mask, I don't want to deal with it, that shows that you have no strong willpower of your own. Their will is not called into action by reason or judgment, but under the control and feeling and emotion and of their so-called authority. Most of it pretended authority. And by the way, all of the so-called experts with COVID-19, they never cite controlled research. They just say, oh, masks are going to help, or if you don't wear masks, this is going to happen, or that's going to happen. They never actually cite controlled research. I have the controlled research that say masks are ineffective and actually could cause you more harm. Most so-called authorities don't know, and that's probably the case with these people. They don't really know, so they want to seem like they're doing something. And no, they don't know, but the people haven't found them out yet. I tend to think that's true, especially with these governors and these people. I think they feel stupid, so they're sticking to their initial position, although some of them have flip-flopped. Those who take initiative for themselves tend to be less suggestible. Initiative means doing something without being told and using one's own wits and resources. The true American spirit, which Americans lack, clearly. The degree of power. The degree of power in giving this form of suggestion depends on the will of the suggester, their appearance, manners, their air, their tone. If one doesn't really truly have a strong will, they become imitators. And that's what most people are, who are just wearing masks, agreeing to quarantines, social distancing. There's no evidence any of this works. The numbers are I'm not going to go over the numbers. Suggestion, now the next form of suggestion through imitation. This form of suggestion is common and speaks for itself. Again, people are imitating the whole mask thing. People constantly pick up the mental states, emotions, feelings of those around them and reproduce them in their own acts. Most humans are like sheep who follow a leader or other people anywhere and on all sorts of paths. Most do things just because others do. That's what's happening here. And it's not easy to go against the grain, especially when you know it's wrong. Trust me on that. But I do what's right always. I do what's right for me. And I do care about other people, but I'm responsible for myself. You can never be personally responsible for somebody else's health. That's a guise to trick people into doing things that they wouldn't normally do. When the papers, media, or leader make a suggestion, suddenly many manifest symptoms, or when a crime is reported, suddenly many others follow the crime. So a lot of times when people say, oh, COVID-19, all of a sudden people will just have symptoms. And this has happened with various viruses outside of even this one. When it starts getting reported, numbers tend to go up after that. And the same applies with crimes. Very specific kinds of crimes, when they get reported on the news or in the newspaper, those crimes tend to go up. So it's a suggestibility. Feelings and emotions are called into play, and physical effects shortly follow. So that's and to counter this, you must build up your individuality and develop positivity. That's and your logic and reason and your willpower. Those things all protect you. We'll get more into protection later in this actual lesson or part. 3. Suggestion through association is the third. It's based on acquired impressions by which certain words, actions, manners, tones, appearances, etc. are associated with previously experienced mental states. So I'll give you an example outside of the COVID example for me. For me, I know When I listen to, there are two kinds of music. I listened to 80s pop when I was like in elementary school, and then heavy metal in junior high school and high school. So when I listen to those, I get the associated feelings that I had in elementary school and high school. Those were kind of days of innocence. So I like to listen to those things sometimes because they bring me back to a time of innocence. And sometimes the heavy metal just gets me hyped up too. But which can be good and can be bad. But they bring me back. They give me an associated feeling, even though I listened to them 100 times, and I like that feeling. So but you can also bring up feeling. There can be feelings of fear, like you can remember a scary movie, and something that you associate with that scary movie can brought up, and that can give you fear. So that's how you can, through association of something that happened in the past, you can bring up a specific response, whether that's joy, fear, love. So that's suggestion through association. Mental states take form in physical action and expression. This mental image from an associated mental state is calculated to induce a similar corresponding mental state of the person seeing or hearing. So these symbols, which a word can be a symbol, a hand motion can be a written symbol can be a symbol, or a written word can be a symbol. So that symbol can actually induce a certain, you can associate that symbol with a certain feeling from the past, and it can induce a certain mental state in you that causes a specific action, and that's a form of suggestion through association. And words are a great an outward physical sign of a mental state, whether written or verbal. Words in themselves have no power. It's the associated feeling that gives them power. In the art of here's a little bit of the art of the suggester. Suggestion depends on force and effect upon some accustomed association with some inner feeling, which the feeling is reproduced or induced by the outward symbol of the thing. So the symbol produces, like I said before, that symbol produces a feeling that causes an outward action. Another way is we can associate certain things with a certain feeling, and when we see these things, we are apt to feel those feelings, which induces a certain action within us. The suggestionist watches closely and discovers certain words, tones, and manners, appearances, actions, motions that are associated in the minds of people with certain feelings or ideas, and then when he wishes to induce others in these ideas, he reproduces the physical symbols in words, mannerisms, motions, ideas, appearances, words, the effect, and then the effect is produced. So you get the feeling, and then you get the effect, and the cause would be the induced mental state or the induced feeling that causes somebody to act in a certain way, and that's one of the keys to suggestion. One can be fooled by an authoritative actor assuming a certain character to induce a feeling that produces the desired result or action in you. Putting forward an outward symbol to induce a certain feeling is the master key to suggestion. So putting forward that outward symbol to induce a certain feeling is the master key, because that feeling will cause you to act in a certain way. If you induce fear in people over COVID-19, they're going to want to quarantine, they're going to want to social distance, they're going to want to wear a mask because they're going to die if they don't do it. So you're going to get them to act, you're going to get fear in them, and then you're going to get them to act in a certain way. You're inducing a certain mental state that gets them to act in a certain way. Playing upon feeling, emotion, and the passion of people using skillful words, tones, expression, induce love, fear, hate, greed, patriotism, courage, sympathy, and jealousy is effective in suggestion. Flamboyant tones. I give these examples. Hope and change. Whoa, that's so good. But they're really just meaningless. Things like that are meaningless words. I'm also going to say make America great again. I mean, what are these things? If you use use your logical mind or reasonable mind as a defense with make America great again or hope and change, well, what specifically? I mean, when they're campaigning, they just put out these, what's the word? Campaign logos. The campaign logos. The word's not coming to me, and they really are just meaningless. Hope and change. I mean, that could mean anything. It could be good for one person and not good for another. But you see how these kinds of things, like but they're meaningless. But they play on your emotions, they play on your feelings, and they induce a certain state in you that makes you act a certain way. So the actor is important in this from the perspective of this suggestor. The actor is one who is flamboyant and plays the emotive side, includes good orators, pleaders, salesmen. They are all charming or drawing. It doesn't beat down the will, the actor, but it bypasses it in this case. How to protect yourself. Here's some ways to protect yourself. Adopt, and we go into this a little more, but this is, so adopt a policy of never acting immediately in response to an emotional appeal. Wait. Cultivate willpower, which provides a shield from suggestion and mentative currents, which, you know, mentative currents aren't relevant to this section, but it shields you from cultivate willpower to shield you from suggestion. Learn to recognize suggestion. When is someone being trying to slip in a suggestion to you? Be careful when here's a big one, be careful when you're worn out or tired or in a passive, pleasurable state. When in doubt, say no, because the will is weak when you're tired or you're worn down or you're, you know, also that may be a time when you want to, you know, if the wife is tired or worn down, or the husband, or, you know, one of the kids or a parent, whatever it may be, if they're worn down, that may be when you want to ask them for something because they might not want to deal with it. But it would be smart of them to say no and then think about it logically later. Now we go into the fourth form of suggestion, which is suggestion through repetition. And I think this one is interesting because you can basically normalize things through this. If somebody hears something enough, it starts becoming normal in their mind. And once something is normalized, they'll say, no problem. At first, you'll have your defenses up and you say, no way, that's crazy. But then after suggesting, it becomes normalized and you're more likely to be suggestible to something. So constant dripping will wear away the hardest stone. That's a metaphor, simile. The man who told a lie so much he began to believe it. I've done that before. This is terrible, but in a different phase of my life, I would tell somebody that I was dating that I was going to do early retire. I had no plan on retiring, but I was at the time personal trainer. I said I was doing well. I said I'm going to do an early retirement, and I kind of legitimately got lazy with my with my business, and and I went through a bad phase, and eventually I had to build it back up. But I kept repeating myself, and I suggested that to myself, and I really let myself go, and it was pretty bad, and it was a joke. But I was an auto suggestion. I became what I said I was going to become. Retiring early, and then eventually I figured it out, and got everything back again. So this is weakened resistance through repetitive attack and force of habit. The first time a suggestion is made, as I said, the mind actively resists, but the next time the suggestion is not so unfamiliar and less resistance is set up, and eventually there's no resistance at all, and the suggestion is accepted. So unless we understand, we will fight, then resist, then accept. So that's what happens. We fight, we resist, and then we accept, unless we can see it and defend against it through willpower, through logic and reason. Each time you send the impression, it gets deeper in the mind. Once it becomes impressed in the mind, the suggestion, it's not apt to discriminate. Like a cuckoo, an illegitimate mental impression is nurtured as one's very own. If something is strange, you question it, but if it's repeated, it's not strange and it's accepted. Politicians will repeat the same thing over and over to sway the opinion. Over and over, and it will be repeated in a different way over and over to sway the opinion, and eventually you think it's yours, and when really at first you fought against it. Suggestion gains force by each repetition. This is a fundamental law of suggestion. So reputations can be destroyed by the repeated sneers of gossipers and evil wishers. You can repeat something about somebody that's totally not true, and people will just accept it, even though it's not true. I'll give you an example. I'm apolitical, but, everybody said Trump colluded with Russia. Everybody believed it. I don't follow the media, so I didn't believe it, and I take a outside perspective on this. People just kept saying it over and over again, and it was absolutely proven I read the dossier or whatever you call it because somebody sent it to me saying that Trump was colluded with Russia, and it said Russia interfered with elections, but it never said Trump did anything. And people still think that Trump colluded with elections. That's gossip, and that was somebody ruining somebody's reputation who actually didn't do anything wrong, and then they impeached him, and there was nothing there. I'm no fan of Trump. I'm not a voter, but I think people spread a lot of rumor. I'm not saying there aren't some bad characteristics there, but a lot of people spread rumors about him, and they're just not true. And this actually, it ruins people's reputation. Try and never take no for an answer are the axioms of advertisers and salesmen. So suggestion gains force by each repetition. Warning. Here's a warning. Do not believe something is true because it is repeated. Do not allow your judgment to be put to sleep or become drowsy by repetition or the slumber song. Keep awake. Understanding the law will put light on many things. Keep awake. Understanding these laws will put the light on many things. Uh-oh, I have COVID. I'm joking. There are 3 forms of application of suggestion. There's involuntary suggestion, voluntary suggestion, and auto-suggestion. And this is gonna be an overview on these 3 because we go into these in more detail in the antecedent lessons or parts or chapters, whatever you want to call them. So voluntary suggestion, involuntary suggestion, and auto-suggestion. Involuntary suggestion. This is a form of suggestion without a purpose that occurs every moment over the life of everybody, and it's constantly going on all around us. We are unconscious of these things and constantly influencing those around us. So, if I walk around with a smile on my face, I'm influencing people in one way, whereas if I walk around with a frown, no. Whereas if I walk around with a frown, I'm going to influence people the other way, and this may be involuntary, so it's subconscious. So a lot of times we might not like some of the involuntary things we do, so we need to work on them, and we'll get into that as we proceed. We affect those around us with our mental attitudes manifested in action. Here are the rules of involuntary suggestion. Our words, action, tones, appearances on general personality convey suggestion to those around us, inducing mental states in accordance therewith. What you wish to impress on the world. My writing's terrible. Be what you wish to impress on the world. So, if you wish to impress positivity on the world, look like happy, look enthusiastic, even if you don't really feel it. Sometimes your physical action will induce a mental state and vice versa. Sometimes a mental state will induce certain physical actions. We'll get more into that in later lessons. Form a correct mental attitude based on a part you wish to play, then play it out to the best of your ability. So don't be fake, but eventually, if you want to be a happy, positive person and you want to influence the people around you in that way, then act the part. You don't have to be fake about it, but act positive and happy. Now let's go into voluntary suggestion. This form can be grouped into 3 classes, and this we go over big time in section 3 or part 3. So the forms are grouped in 3 classes: suggestive treatment, hypnotic suggestion, and suggestion in the form of personal influence. Personal influence will be a big one. And we'll go over them briefly now. Suggestive treatment is a form of treatment for mental or physical ills or deficiencies. The principle rests on the fact that brain cells and brain centers can be grown, developed, and increased by properly directed suggestions, so one may be made over mentally. Hypnotic suggestion is a combination of mentative energy coupled with suggestion, and we'll mention it briefly. I caution against the use of this, as the will of the hypnotizer overpowers the suggester, and the suggestions can be exaggerated. So I wouldn't suggest getting hypnotized personally, and I almost did, but I'm glad I didn't, because you're giving somebody else power over you, and you may or may not know them well, or you may or may not trust them. But even if you trust them, some of their suggestions may overpower you, or they may slip something in that's not good, and it'll mess you up. You can do auto-suggestion on yourself, which we'll get into shortly. Personal influence, well, there will be a whole huge thing on this in the next section, so skip, personal influence. Auto-suggestion, this refers to self-suggestion given by one's own mind. This will have its own section in mental architecture, which is huge. I would do this over hypnotic suggestion by somebody else. This is how we can become new selves and how we can treat our own afflictions. Almost home. Feelings versus reason. Regarding the effects of suggestion and inducing mental states, you can make a man think with you if you work on his feelings or higher nature, even though you run counter to his ordinary judgment. By higher nature, we mean his desire, actually, in this case. If you can dazzle his reason sufficiently, you can spur him to almost any action which man is capable of. So, you bypass people. So here's a good example that I like to give about bypassing reason. There's a lot of different stuff going on with COVID-19. So when you have a lot of different information that's saying different things, you can't really, like, what? It says this, then this, but then you're instilling fear in people. You're bypassing their logical, the reasonable part of their mind and going directly into the fear zone, because there is nothing, like, you're giving so much mismatch information that there's no way the average person can logically process it, and so you're going straight into that, that fear zone with all the fear that the media is pushing. So that's, you can make a man feel with you if you work on his emotive mentality. And then another good thing is a statement, then a question. This can actually have an interesting suggestive effect. This is a beautiful shade, is it not? So you're already planting that it's beautiful, and then they say, yeah, it's a beautiful shade. Also, another thing is sitting or standing. If I was up here, that gives I would have more authority, actually. Actually, as a matter of fact, maybe tomorrow for the next lesson, I'll actually put like a book underneath me to see if it actually has an effect. That would be an interesting experiment. So suggestion deals with physical agents of mentative induction. So physical agents inducing mental states is what suggestion is, and that's basically the gist of it. And that's lesson 3 on suggestion. Mental magic. Have a good one.